Before we dive in, if this kind of deep, no-fluff insight is what you've been looking for, you're in the right place. Hit that subscribe button so you never miss a breakdown. Drop a like if you want more content like this. And let us know in the comments which lesson hits hardest for you. We read every single one. Welcome to Mindcode Vault, where every video hands you a mental upgrade you can use the same day you watch it. Now let's get into it. The day you realize you're the problem, there's a moment most people never forget. You're sitting across from someone, a colleague, a partner, a friend, and no matter what you say, they just don't get it. You've explained yourself clearly. You've been patient. You've even tried to stay calm. And yet the conversation ends the same way it always does, with you feeling like you're the only sane person in the room, wondering how anyone this dense made it this far in life. You've probably had that thought. Maybe you've whispered it under your breath, or laughed about it with someone you trust. Am I surrounded by idiots? Thomas Erickson didn't write his book as a joke. He wrote it because he genuinely believed, for most of his early career, that he was, and the day he discovered he was wrong, that the problem wasn't the people around him, but his complete failure to understand them, was the day his life changed permanently. This audiobook is built on that same revelation, because here's what nobody tells you when you're struggling with difficult people, frustrating coworkers, impossible clients, or emotionally exhausting relationships. The issue almost never lives in the other person. It lives in the gap between who they are and who you expected them to be. Close that gap, and you don't just get better at communication, you get better at everything. Business, money, relationships, leadership, even how you understand yourself. Over the next hour or so, you're going to walk through 10 of the most powerful lessons hidden inside Erickson's framework, lessons the book gestures toward but that most readers never fully extract. We're going to go deeper. We're going to make them real, practical, and immediately useful. By the time we're done, you will never look at another human being quite the same way again. Lesson 1. There are only 4 types of people, and you've already met them. All the core of Thomas Erickson's entire framework rests on a surprisingly simple premise: that every human being on Earth, despite our infinite complexity, our different childhoods and cultures and traumas and dreams, tends to operate primarily from one of 4 behavioral profiles. He calls them by colors: red, yellow, green, blue, and while it might feel reductive at first, too neat, too clean, the more you sit with it, the more it explains almost everything that has ever confused you about another person. Reds are the drivers. They want results. They want them now, and they have very little patience for anything that slows that process down. They walk fast, talk fast, decide fast. They're the ones who interrupt you mid-sentence, not because they're rude, though they can be, but because they've already processed what you're going to say and they're ready to move. They thrive on control, challenge, and visible progress. In business, they make formidable leaders and terrifying opponents. In relationships, they can be passionate and decisive, but also domineering and tone-deaf. Yellows are they are warm, optimistic, expressive, and almost irresistibly charming when they're at their best. They light up rooms. They generate enthusiasm like it's a natural resource they've been blessed with in unlimited quantities. They think in big pictures, love ideas, love people, and tend to treat every conversation as an opportunity to connect. Their weakness: follow through details, bore them. Structure feels like a cage, and they can confuse being liked with being effective, sometimes making promises their enthusiasm can't cash. Grins are the stabilizers. They are patient, reliable, warm in a quieter way than yellows, deeply loyal, and almost allergic to conflict. They are the people who keep showing up, year after year, without drama or fanfare, doing what they said they would do. They are the emotional glue of every team and every family. Their weakness is that they can be so conflict-averse that they let situations fester for years rather than speak up. They say yes when they mean no. They smile when they're devastated. And they can confuse keeping the peace with actually having peace. Blues are the analysts. They are precise, systematic, detail-oriented, and deeply uncomfortable with things left unexplained. They need data before they decide. They need evidence before they trust. They need time before they act. In a world that rewards speed and gut feeling, blues can look slow, cold, or difficult. But when everyone else has made the same expensive mistake for the 3rd time because nobody bothered to think it through, the blue in the room is quietly building the spreadsheet that proves what went wrong. Now here's what makes this lesson transformational rather than merely interesting. You're not just learning to categorize other people. You're learning to stop being shocked by them. The red who steamrolls your ideas in the meeting isn't attacking you personally. The yellow who promised to finish the project and then forgot isn't lazy or dishonest. The green who never tells you what's wrong until it explodes isn't passed on purpose. The blue who asks 17 questions before agreeing to anything isn't trying to obstruct you. They're all doing exactly what their wiring tells them to do. And until you understand that, you're going to keep taking it personally. Lesson 2. You are not the default. You are also a type. One of the most quietly uncomfortable things about Erickson's framework is this. it doesn't let you off the hook. Most people read personality frameworks and do the same thing. They classify everyone around them and then conclude that they themselves are simply normal, balanced, reasonable, the baseline against which other people's quirks are measured. This is not humility. This is one of the most persistent and damaging blind spots a human being can carry. You are a type. You have a dominant color, and that color comes with its own set of predictable strengths, predictable weaknesses, predictable ways of driving other people absolutely crazy. The question isn't whether your tendencies cause friction with others. They do, they always do, but whether you've bothered to understand how and why. Think about this practically. If you're a red dominant person, your decisiveness and ambition are real assets, but your impatience can make everyone around you feel like they're always behind, always failing, always slightly inadequate. You may not mean it. You may not even notice it. But the green in your team is lying awake at night wondering what they did wrong because of the way you responded to their email at 11% satisfaction rather than your usual 53%. Details you wouldn't even remember the next morning. If you're a yell at your energy and optimism genuinely lift people, with your tendency to dominate conversations, to turn every topic back toward yourself, and to overpromise can quietly erode the trust of everyone who has learned, sometimes painfully, that your enthusiasm is not the same thing as a guarantee. And you often have no idea this is happening because people tend to smile at yellows, even when they're frustrated. Greens who don't recognize themselves in this framework often make the most expensive mistake of all. They believe that because they never cause conflict, they have no impact on conflict. But conflict avoidance is not neutrality. Every time a green buries a legitimate concern to preserve the surface of a relationship, they are making a choice that accumulates into resentment, eventually erupting with a force that seems completely disproportionate to the people who had no idea anything was wrong. And blues who over-index on their analytical nature can become paralyzed at exactly a moment when a decision must be made with incomplete information, which, in the real world, is almost always. Their pursuit of certainty can look like perfectionism, stinginess with trust, or arrogance about their own judgment. Other types interpret the blues' need for more data not as rigor but as obstruction, and relationships quietly calcify around that. Misread. The lesson here is not to fix yourself. It's to see yourself clearly enough that your defaults stop running your life on autopilot. Self-awareness is not just a virtue in Erickson's framework, it is the prerequisite for everything else. Lesson 3. The communication crisis is a translation. Crisis. Here's a scenario that plays out thousands of times a day in offices, homes, and group chats around the world. Two people are discussing the same topic, using the same language, and somehow arriving at completely opposite conclusions about what was said. Neither one is lying, neither one is stupid. They're simply operating in different communication languages, and nobody thought to translate. Reds communicate to decide. When they speak, they're moving toward an outcome. Information that doesn't serve that outcome is, to them, clutter. A red doesn't need you to explain how you feel about the project. They need you to tell them if it'll be done by Friday. That's not coldness, that's efficiency from their perspective. The problem is that a green or a yellow on the receiving end of that energy hears something entirely different. They hear, you don't matter. Your feelings are irrelevant. We are not a team, you are a resource. This translation error is not a small thing. It destroys partnerships, it ends careers, it poisons company cultures. I think of a startup I once knew of, with a red founder and a green head of product. The founder was brilliant, driven, and completely incapable of understanding why his head of product kept going quiet after feedback sessions. The product lead, a textbook green, was interpreting the founder's brusque critiques as personal rejection. He was withdrawing not out of weakness but out of self-preservation, which looked to the red like disengagement. Within a year, the product lead was gone. A year after that, so was the company. Not because of a bad product, because of a translation failure that nobody named until it was too late. Yellows communicate to connect. They use stories, humor, tangents, and enthusiasm as their primary mode of building rapport. To a blue, this looks like a profound waste of time. The blue came to the meeting for the numbers. The yellow is still on the third anecdote. The yellow cannot understand why the blue never seems to warm up. The blue cannot understand why the yellow won't just get to the point. And they will have this exact same experience of each other in every meeting, every conversation, every collaboration, until one of them understands what is actually happening. Here is the actionable core of this lesson. Before every important conversation, ask yourself one question. What does this person need from this interaction? Not, what do you need? Not, what is the logical thing to communicate? What does this specific person, with this specific wiring, need in order to actually receive what you're trying to say? A red needs brevity and outcomes. A yellow needs energy and acknowledgement. A green needs time, warmth, and the reassurance that conflict is not coming. A blue needs evidence, structure, and space to process. Give people what they need to hear, and they'll actually hear what you're saying. Lesson 4. Conflict styles are as different as personalities if communication is a language. Conflict is a dialect that most people have never formally studied, and nowhere does the four-type framework become more urgent or more revealing than in the moments when things go wrong between people. Reds approach conflict the way they approach most things, directly, immediately, and with complete confidence that their position is correct. They don't ruminate. They don't circle back weeks later. When they're upset, you know it, and they expect resolution in real time. 2. A red, avoiding conflict doesn't preserve the relationship, it disrespects it. If something matters, you say it. If you don't say it, it must not matter. This framework makes perfect sense to other reds and is utterly bewildering to everyone else. Greens, the other side of the spectrum, will absorb extraordinary amounts of friction before they'll initiate a difficult conversation. They have a hierarchy of reasons why right now is not the moment. Someone might get upset. The timing isn't ideal. Maybe it'll resolve itself. Maybe they're overreacting. What looks like patience from the outside is often anxiety from the inside. And while they're absorbing and waiting and hoping, the unspoken thing is growing. By the time a green finally speaks, it's rarely about just the thing they're speaking about. It's about everything they didn't say for the past 18 months. Yellows tend to treat conflict as a bump in the social road, something to smooth over quickly with warmth, humor, and the sincere hope that everyone will just move past it. They're not cowards. They genuinely believe that good energy can fix most things. The danger is that they sometimes mistake the absence of tension for the resolution of the underlying issue. They patch the surface and call it fixed, and then are genuinely baffled when the same conflict reappears 2 months later, bigger and angrier than before. Blues process conflict the way they process everything, by going internal. They need to think it through, gather their evidence, construct their argument, and only then do they feel equipped to engage. To everyone else, this looks like stonewalling. The blue is not stonewalling. They are preparing. But if you interpret their silence as indifference and escalate before they've had time to process, you will get a response that feels cold and defensive, and the actual issue will never be addressed, because now you're arguing about the way the argument started. The modern workplace has essentially mandated that we all become fluent in conflict styles we were never trained in. Remote work has made this worse. Text and email strip away tone, body language, and timing, the contextual clues that even unskilled communicators use to adjust in real time. A Slack message that reads as efficient to a red reads as hostile. To a green, a lengthy email that feels thorough to a blue feels like an attack to a yellow who skimmed it and picked up the wrong emphasis. Learning to recognize what kind of conflict you're in, and more importantly, what kind of conflict your counterpart is experiencing, is the difference between resolution and escalation. Lesson 5. You've been misreading motivation your entire life. Here's one of the most practically expansive mistakes that intelligent, self-aware people make without ever realizing it. Assuming that other people are motivated by the same things that motivate them. This error doesn't just lead to confusion. It leads to failed leadership, broken business partnerships, and a persistent feeling that you're constantly giving people what they need and somehow it's never enough. Reds are motivated by results, recognition of their competence, and the sensation of forward momentum. They want to win, and they want everyone to know they won. If you want to get the most from a red dominant person or build a lasting relationship with one, you need to connect what you're asking of them to an outcome that matters. Don't appeal to loyalty. Don't appeal to process. Show them the scoreboard and make clear how their contribution affects the final number. Yellows are motivated by connection, enthusiasm, and the experience of being seen and appreciated. They want to feel like part of something exciting. They want to be inspired, not managed. The single most effective thing you can do with a yellow is make them feel that their presence genuinely makes things better, because it usually does. When channeled correctly, the moment you reduce a yellow to a task list, you lose them. Not because they're lazy, but because task lists have no soul. And yellows run on soul. Greens are motivated by stability, belonging, and the deep satisfaction of being genuinely useful, which are two people they care about. They don't need the spotlight. They don't need the scoreboard. They need to know that their contribution matters to the people around them, that the environment they're working in is stable and human, and that the relationships they've invested in are real. This is why a green who works in a toxic culture or under an unreliable leader tends to disengage so completely, not with drama, but with a quiet, devastating withdrawal that can take years for management to notice. Blues are motivated by quality, accuracy, and the satisfaction of understanding something completely. They want to get it right. They want to build systems that last. They want to be respected for the depth of their thinking, not just the speed of their output. If you want to engage a blue, give them a genuinely complex problem and the time to solve it well. Rush them, micromanage them, or dismiss their concern with detail as excessive, and you will watch one of your most valuable people slowly root their best energy somewhere else. This lesson has immediate applications in the AI and freelance economy that is reshaping how most people work. If you're building a remote team, managing contractors, or running a client-based service, you are constantly deploying motivation without being able to observe its effect in real time. Understanding which type you're working with determines everything from how you brief a project to how you give feedback to how you structure your chickens midst this, and you'll keep wondering why talented people keep underperforming or disappearing. Get it right, and you'll find that managing people becomes almost effortless. Lesson 6. The danger of surrounding yourself with your own type. There is a gravitational pull between people who share a behavioral style. Reds are energized by other reds. The pace is right. The directness is welcome. The shared hunger for results creates a current of mutual recognition. Yellows love other yellows. Conversations become events. Ideas cascade. Enthusiasm compounds. Greens find peace with other greens. Blues find depth with other blues. It's comfortable. It's validating. And it is, slowly and surely, making your thinking worse. Every type, at its extreme, has a shadow. The team of all reds moves fast and breaks things, not in the Silicon Valley startup sense, but in the sense that they leave carnage. Unresolved people problems. Ignored early warning signs. Strategic blind spots they were too impatient to investigate. The team of all yellows generates magnificent energy and accomplishes almost nothing, because nobody wanted to be the one who said, "But what's the actual plan?" The team of all greens is harmonious and paralyzed and able to make a difficult decision because making a difficult decision might upset someone. The team of all blues is thorough and airless, suffocating under the weight of its own analysis, missing market windows while perfecting the documentation. The research on team performance is remarkably consistent on this point. Cognitive and behavioral diversity isn't just a nice-to, it is the single greatest predictor of a team's ability to solve novel problems. And the companies that figured this out earliest, the ones that deliberately assembled cross-type leadership teams and invested in communication frameworks to make those teams functional, have consistently outperformed their homogeneous competitors over the long run. The personal application of this is worth sitting with. Look at the 5 people you spend the most time with. Are they predominantly the same type as you? Do your friendships feel validating but somehow unsatisfying in a way you can't quite articulate? Do your business partnerships feel easy at first, and then stall at exactly the same point, over and over? You may not have a people problem, you may have a diversity problem, and not the kind you usually hear about, deliberately. Seeking out people who complement your weaknesses isn't weakness. It isn't a sign that you need help. It's the highest form of strategic self-awareness, knowing exactly where your native intelligence ends and where someone else's begins, and building a life in a team that covers both. Lesson 7. Every type looks different under pressure. This is the lesson that most personality frameworks skip entirely, and it may be the most important one. Because understanding someone at their best is genuinely useful, but understanding someone at their worst, under pressure, in fear, in failure, under exhaustion, under deadline, that's where insight becomes power. Reds under pressure become tyrants. The decisiveness that is so effective in calm conditions curdles into aggression and control-seeking. They stop listening. They override input. They move so fast toward the outcome they've decided on that they become genuinely dangerous to the people around them and to the organizations they lead. History is full of dominant leaders who accomplished extraordinary things during periods of growth and then destroyed those same things during periods of adversity, because they could not adapt their approach when control was no longer an available option. Yellows under pressure become manic and then disappear. They escalate their energy, their optimism, their social output, not because it's working, but because it's the only response they have. And when that fails, when the enthusiasm doesn't fix the problem, they often vanish. Mentally, emotionally, sometimes physically. The ghost who was the life of the party last quarter. The team member who stopped returning messages in October. Pressure doesn't bring out the yellow's darkness. It reveals that they never built resilience for the moments when good energy isn't enough. Greens under pressure become passive-aggressive in ways they genuinely don't recognize as passive-aggressive. They comply without committing, they smile without agreeing, they say yes with a body language that says something far more complicated. And because they've spent so long suppressing their needs in service of the group's harmony, when something finally breaks through that suppression, it can be explosive in a way that seems completely disconnected from any specific cause, because it isn't about any specific cause. It's about all of them. Blues under pressure become hermits. They retreat so far into their internal processing that they become functionally unavailable, even to the people who most need them to show up. They hyper-focus on finding the perfect answer, which means they frequently deliver no answer at the moment when a good enough answer would have changed everything. And in their absence, other types make the decisions the blue would have made far better if only they had surfaced. Knowing this, truly knowing it, not just as a concept but as a live recognition, changes how you respond when things go wrong on your team, in your relationships, in your partnerships. Instead of reacting to the behavior, you can see through it to the stress underneath. And instead of meeting a tyrant with resistance, you can meet the fear that created the tyrant. Instead of waiting for the ghost to come back on their own, you can create a safe enough space that they don't feel the need to disappear in the first place. Lesson 8. The person you've been calling difficult is actually just different. There is a word that follows certain people through their entire professional lives like a shadow they can never escape. Difficult, and in almost every case, not some cases, almost every case, that label says more about the people applying it than the person it describes. The blue who asks too many questions before committing to a plan is not being obstructive. They are doing due diligence that the group is going to wish had been done when the plan falls apart at the implementation stage, because nobody thought through the third-order consequences. The red who seems aggressive in the feedback session isn't trying to humiliate you. They are operating from a framework in which directness is respect and softening a truth is condescension. The green who seems unreachable after a conflict isn't being dramatic. They are processing at a depth that most people never even reach, trying to integrate the experience before they respond in the freelancing gig economy, where working relationships are compressed, high stakes, and often asynchronously distributed. The cost of misreading someone as difficult rather than different is enormous. A client who micromanages is almost always a blue or a red who hasn't received enough certainty that their investment is being honored. A collaborator who goes silent isn't passive-aggressive, they're overwhelmed and processing. A contractor who seems to need excessive validation isn't insecure, they're yellow dominant and motivated by connection, not just compensation. The actionable insight is this. The next time you're about to label someone difficult, pause. Ask yourself what color they most likely are. Ask yourself what need that behavior is expressing. Ask yourself what it would take specifically, concretely, not in a general sense but in a behavioral sense, to make them feel seen enough to operate at their best rather than their worst. This single mental reframe has the potential to recover relationships that most people would simply write off. Lesson 9. Adapting is not losing yourself. This is where many people hit a wall with behavioral frameworks. They understand the theory, they can see the types clearly in the people around them, and then they reach the point of application, the part where you're supposed to adjust your own communication style to meet someone else, and something in them recoils. It feels like performance. It feels like manipulation. It feels, at its most resistant, like betrayal of the self. Here's the reframe that makes this not just possible but genuinely liberating. Adaptation is not an authenticity. It is fluency. When you speak to someone in their language, not instead of yours, but in addition to yours, you are not becoming someone you're not. You are expanding your range. You are choosing effectiveness over ego. Think about the most compelling communicators you've ever encountered. The leaders who somehow made everyone feel understood. The salespeople who never felt like they were selling. The friends who had the rare gift of making you feel like the most important person in the room. They weren't performing a different personality for each person. They were doing something much more sophisticated. They were reading what each person needed and delivering it in the way that person could receive it. This is not manipulation. Manipulation is adapting your behavior to serve your interests at someone else's expense. Adaptation in Erickson's sense is calibrating your delivery to ensure that your genuine message actually lands. The modern professional landscape is demanding this skill with an urgency it has never demanded before. The AI economy is compressing workforces, flattening hierarchies, and putting a premium on human skills that algorithms cannot replicate. Empathy, persuasion, adaptability, the ability to build trust in compressed timeframes. The person who can speak red to a red and green to a green, who can shift registers without losing their core, who can build rapport across type lines as fluently as they build it within them. That person is nearly impossible to replace and almost always impossible to overlook. Start small. Before your next significant conversation, spend 2 minutes identifying the other person's dominant type and deciding one specific adjustment you'll make, whether in pacing, in how much data you bring, in how much warmth you lead with, in how much space you leave for processing. Just one adjustment. Notice what changes, then do it again. Fluency comes from practice, not from reading. Lesson 10. The most important relationship you'll ever decode is the one with yourself. Everything we've covered, the 4 types, the communication gaps, the conflict styles, the motivation mismatches, the pressure responses, the adaptation imperative, all of it converges here. But the lesson that most people who consume frameworks like this never quite reach, because it's easier to apply insight outward than inward. It's more comfortable to understand other people's blind spots than your own. And the most transformational thing Erickson's book ultimately offers isn't a map of the people around you. It's a mirror. When you know your dominant type, really know it. Not just as a flattering self-description, but as a full accounting of both the gifts and the costs. You stop confusing your default behaviors with universal truths. You stop assuming that the way you make decisions is the way decisions should be made. You stop taking it personally when someone operates from an entirely different internal logic, because you understand that their logic is just as coherent as yours, just aimed at a different set of values. This has a name in developmental psychology. It's called differentiation, the ability to maintain your own perspective while genuinely holding space for another. It is the psychological foundation of all real intimacy, all effective leadership, all durable partnership. And it is shockingly rare. Most people spend their lives in one of two failure modes: fusion, where they lose themselves in the needs and expectations of others, or isolation, where they protect their perspective so fiercely that they never genuinely connect. The four-type framework gives you a third path: understand yourself well enough to stay yourself, and understand others well enough to genuinely meet them. In practical terms, this means something very specific. It means that the anxiety you feel when you're not in control might be a red shadow that no longer serves you. It means the energy you spend managing everyone's feelings might be a green pattern that's costing you more than it's protecting you. It means the reasons you give yourself for not committing to a decision might not be wisdom. They might be blue perfectionism dressed up as rigor. And the enthusiastic promises you keep not quite delivering on might not be a character flaw. They might be yellow wiring that simply needs structure. The person you've been calling an idiot, the one who frustrates you, baffles you, exhausts you, is almost certainly just someone whose primary needs are so different from yours that you've been interpreting their behavior as malfunction when it was actually just difference. And the day you genuinely internalize that, the day it stops being a theory and becomes the actual lens through which you see people, is the day a great deal of unnecessary suffering stops. Closing reflection: the price of staying blind. Here is the honest truth about what it costs to ignore everything we've just covered. Every failed collaboration you've walked away from shaking your head. Every relationship that ended in exhaustion rather than resolution. Every team you've built that couldn't hold together under pressure. Every client you've lost. Every hire you've made that didn't work out. Every conversation that left you feeling more alone than before it started. In almost every one of those cases, somewhere in the sequence of events, there was a moment when a deeper understanding of human behavioral difference would have changed the outcome. We like to attribute our relational failures to the other people. Involves a natural thing to do. It's also a way of guaranteeing that the same failures repeat. Because if the problem is always them, you never have to change anything. You just have to wait for better people. And better people, as you've probably begun to notice, don't seem to arrive in the quantity or the quality you were hoping for. The alternative: genuinely learning the language of human difference, building the skill of type recognition and behavioral adaptation, developing the self-awareness to see your own defaults clearly enough to choose when to honor them and when to override them. This is not an abstract personal development goal. It is a concrete competitive advantage. It is the thing that separates leaders who inspire from leaders who merely manage. It is the difference between partnerships that compound over decades and ones that collapse under the first real stress. It is the gap between a life full of people who understand and feel understood by you, and a life spent feeling, again and again, that you are inexplicably surrounded by idiots. You are not surrounded by idiots. You are surrounded by people whose inner logic you haven't yet learned to read. Start today. Start with one person. Find the color in them that you've been misreading as failure. Bring the language they need to hear, the thing you need to say, and watch what becomes possible when you stop waiting for the world to make sense on your terms and start meeting it on its own.